Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming together today. We'll delay the daily issues till later on in this call. First off, we'll cover off on the Ukraine. Now, I want to make it clear that this is not an assessment. This is an informal discussion between our analysts. If you want formal assessments, please contact us and become a member. They're a written technical process. They're not, at least in our company, something that we write and then put an assessment heading in front of. There is a technical process that we follow. Bhargav, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. So there are escalating issues between the borders of Ukraine and Russia. And if you look at the larger picture, the issues between the Western Bloc, especially Europe and Russia. Now, there are conflicting reports on who's doing what, but what's confirmed is that Russia has begun its special military operations using precision arms technique, as they would call it in Russian terminology. Now, to present the Russian perspective of the entire scenario, I would invite Raga to present a few points so that we can discuss it further, while Uday will present alternate issues which are being disputed by the Western media and analysts.
Thanks, Bhargav. So over the recent hours, we've seen a significant escalation of events, and there's a lot of information that's going around, which is not nearly possible to verify all the time. But what we already know is that Russia has begun its operations. Now, Putin and Russia for the longest time have been requesting NATO that Ukraine cannot be a member or a part of the NATO alliance. However, this has gone ignored. So no further NATO expansion has always been a security request from the Russian side. The other request that they've had and they've maintained is that there's no permanent or of contemporary weapons placed in Ukraine, another thing that has been ignored. So help has arrived from the West in the form of lethal aid as recent as December, where President Biden sanctioned around 90 tons of weapons and equipment to Ukraine. So these have gone into funding and arming neo-Nazi groups in Ukraine who have been fighting against Russian sympathetic troops. So in the context of two red lines that Putin has maintained, both have been crossed. Even as recent as September of last year, Putin had issued the warning that this was a red line that cannot be crossed, and this has been repeatedly been breached. So this is where Russia is coming from, wherein for the last 30 years, they've been promised that NATO would not expand, but NATO has not only expanded by including around 14 members in this period of time, but also having talks with Ukraine on including them. In fact, there already is some level of reconnaissance activities that's happening in Ukraine, and this has been noticed by, and this has been picked up by Russian intelligence as well. So this is one of the other red lines that has been breached. Yeah, so that's it from me.
Can I just raise a point here, everybody? We actually need to define where we think it is at. We have not yet made it clear whether we think Russia is doing a full invasion, as the Western media is trying to point out, or are they invading only the regional provinces plus some airports? We need to define that to give this discussion context for our listeners, please. So Bhargav or Uday, could you do that?
So, Paul, it's an interesting point. When we talk of invasion, it categorically includes boots on ground. And at this point, there are sources which claim that there are Russian troops already in the disputed regions in the east, the Donbas region as it's called. Now, this deployment, it comes based on the request by the leaders of the now independent republics, the Donetsk and Lugansk republics, their leadership calling for Russian help to tackle pro-Ukrainian militias, irregular militias, which are harassing their leadership. Now, if we go by these claims, the invasion is very much in the gray area. While if some of the other sources were to be believed, there are tanks entering from the north away from the disputed regions, which categorically will fall under an outright invasion of Ukrainian territory. So here I will ask Uday to expand on these aspects.
Yeah, so from my perspective at least, it does constitute an invasion. There's boots on the ground, Russian forces that have entered through Belarus and places like Kharkiv, which is outside of separatist-controlled areas or contested areas, which, by the way, the world still recognizes as parts of Ukraine. And we know that Russia is notorious for its disinformation campaigns. Now, regarding what Raga had mentioned about the neo-Nazi threats, which is what Russia is using to justify this invasion, I think it is more of a false pretense kind of thing, the pot calling the kettle black, because yes, there have been neo-Nazi issues with the Azov battalion, for example, in Ukraine, but Ukraine also has a Jewish president who got 73% of the popular vote in the 2019 elections. So I think there is a lot of disinformation going on, and what is happening does constitute an invasion. And for that matter, Ukrainians as a people, about 60% of them have wanted to join the European Union, and they've wanted to join NATO. So from this standpoint, yes, it is a Russian invasion that is not justified.
So in addition to troops on ground, they've also, Russian Defense Ministry has confirmed that they have taken out the air defenses of Ukrainian military, and they have hit several targets, including military air bases near Kiev and other major cities, including Odessa in the south.
And Bhargav, in your view, is that so they can mount a full-scale invasion and annex the entire Ukraine, or are they trying to establish those new independent territories as firmly under Russian control or part of the Russian bloc?
Well, in my perspective, I would say a full-scale invasion and annexation of Ukraine doesn't seem very likely at this point, and Russia has spoken to that effect quite openly. However, what we cannot rule out is a regime change in favor of Russian influence, or let's say this will further enhance Russia's capability in eastern Ukraine, directly exposing its border to some of the Central European countries such as Czech Republic and Hungary, which were also part of the former Soviet bloc. So this is where things seem to be heading. Russia is basically reclaiming its influence in the region. Now, Putin being Putin, we can't really rule out if he has designs to actually permanently deploy his troops in Ukrainian territory. However, I would say Putin is far smarter than that, because he has learned the lessons from the disastrous military campaigns of the US in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he has proven as much given his strategic involvement in Syria and Libya without complete occupation kind of a military operation in these countries. But again, Putin, what happens within Putin's master plan, nobody actually knows.
Okay, I've just lost Bhargav there, but is it also possible, though, that he's sitting back and going, America has just been handed it in a basket in Afghanistan, and their will to drive another war is gone?
I would agree with that, Paul. The West, to a greater extent, especially given the kind of response they have given to the new developments, they do not seem to have a stomach for a large-scale military engagement with Russia or elsewhere, for that matter. UK is sending prayers. Biden is praying for Ukrainian souls. Beyond that, they don't seem to be escalating the issue any further, or they're only planning for economic sanctions. I do not see major military mobilization happening along the borders of Ukraine on the NATO front. Uday, do you have anything further to say on that?
I think to add to that, I think Putin is emboldened by the lack of response by the West in 2014, and even if we take Georgia, Abkhazia as an example. So the lack of actual Western military intervention in these cases is kind of emboldened him, and I guess the Afghanistan point is quite good because this falls under him trying to gauge whether the West could respond, and I think he's betting on the fact that the West wouldn't respond.
And I'd take that one step further too, Uday. I think, the perception of the West, they start to drink their own Powerade and tell everybody it's very yummy. These sanctions of individuals and the various state sanctions being handed out by Western countries and rolled out on the pulpit of various, nebulous places like Australia and Canberra, which Putin won't have any concern in. I think he's judging that as these chaps are not united. They don't have a front against me. I'm not really concerned. While I can, I will. Now, I was always under the belief, therefore, that he, prior to a fairly sloppy set of deterrents being rolled out inconsistently and way too late, I think that does increase the chance that he might go, hey, well, look, I did only want to grab those restive regions, but seeing we're so close and there's no real resistance, he would be reconsidering that now, in my view, operationally. The other thing to note is 90 tonnes of lethal assistance sounds a lot, but that doesn't equate. It might be 1 or 2 battalions equivalent in terms of firepower in the field. And when it's split up into use by guerrillas, it's not much. It sounds good, again, from somebody making a statement to pretend they're doing something substantive. But if I'm Putin now, or Putin's operational analysts, I'm going, wow, we would have expected a whole lot better response than this. Okay, back to you, Bhargav.
I must agree, Paul. Paul, and I would like to raise 2 other issues here. First is the military capability of Ukraine to resist such a large-scale military operation. And they seem to have nearly 500,000 troops, both active and reservists combined. And as far as technical capabilities are concerned, Ukraine is nowhere near Russia, which is a leading arms producer, and they have some of the most sophisticated weaponry across the world. And Russia itself has about 150,000 troops along the borders, with nearly 1 million active troops otherwise. Do you think all of these factors do matter, or do you think the overwhelming technical capability is good enough to drown Ukraine categorically, unless they resort to guerrilla warfare?
You keep cutting yourself off too early, mate, so we don't get all of your message. You cut your last word or 2 off. But look, I think what's more relevant is very clear. The relative strengths between the Ukraine and Russia is a no-brainer. What is of greater concern is NATO and the West as a combined bloc just seem to have a lot of rhetoric, no real will, no real unified plan, and certainly no established leader, and way too much politics. The greatest thing that prevents success for modern militaries is command and control, and that's within the military itself, but also from the political level that's managing that. And if that chain is broken, or individually either of those is weak, then you have a problem, and that is not presenting a relative strength that Putin is fearing. Putin has a lot to gain by getting all of the Ukraine. If you look at the network of gas pipes and whatnot, it gives him options to resell elsewhere if he can't sell to Germany. So, I think we need to consider this. Yes, sure. Historically, there's a lot of reasons why he won't go and just annex Ukraine, but it's too early to rule that out in my view. But let's move on to some other issues, shall we?
Paul. Thank you for that. I would pass on the baton to Uday to cover off on South Asia to begin with.
Sure, Bhargav. So today in South Asia, we covered one major development and 12 other developments. So just quickly to run through, these are topics that we've discussed or assessed before. You can reach out to us for them, our assessments. But Indian security forces retrieved a large cache of explosive materials in Manipur state. Now, Manipur state is an election state with elections planned at the end of the month. And we've talked about how there's a higher propensity for violence in some of the major states in India this year because of the elections. And meanwhile, in Karnataka, the tensions between the Hindu and Muslim community are continuing in Shivamogga district. And businesses need to be aware that these kind of issues can flare up really quickly without much warning and be disruptive to not only travel, but also the security situation in an area. That's it for South Asia for me. Bhargav, I think, Bassel, would you tell us what's going on in the Middle East today?
Thank you, Uday. So in the EMEA region, we had one assessed event and 27 other developments. In Europe, besides the spotlight on the Ukrainian crisis, we have in the UK, London underground workers are set to strike in London. In the UK, at least 10,000 workers from the Transport for London company will go on strike on March 1 and March 3. It is good to note that these workers are members of the National Union of Rail, Maritime and Transport Workers, which enjoys significant support in the country. The main reason for the strike is in protest against the latest TfL plan to cut up to 600 work positions. This strike could potentially lead to disruption in transportation across the capital, London. Another issue another development in the Middle East, in Iraq, the bombardment against ISIS sleeper cells continue. At least 5 suspected Islamic State terrorists were killed by security forces in Koshkaya village in Al-Dibis district in Kirkuk province. Security forces bombarded 2 sleeper cells in the village where the suspected terrorists were holed up. Over to you, Sitati, to cover on Africa.
Thank you, Bassel. In Africa, we covered 7 developments today, and yesterday's disruption of flight operations at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport in Nairobi in Kenya stood out. And the airport's runway was closed after an aircraft stalled due to a mechanical hitch. About 19 flights were delayed or diverted as a result of the closure that lasted for about 4 hours, from about 5:30 p.m. local time to around 9:20 p.m. local time. And then 9 flights were diverted to the Moi International Airport in Mombasa City in Kenya. 3 flights were diverted to the Kilimanjaro International Airport in Tanzania, and 1 flight was diverted to the Dar es Salaam International Airport, also in Tanzania. Then 2 flights were diverted to the Entebbe International Airport in Uganda. So finally on this, the flight operations were restored at about 9:30 p.m. Local time. So over to you, Bhargav, to close today's session. Thank you.
Thanks, Tati. Paul, we need to cover off on Southeast Asia. Today we have reorganized the regions a little. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So just to correct that, East Asia Pacific isn't Southeast Asia. It also includes that wee little territory called North Asia and the Australasia and Pacific Islands. But today you have got it pretty much on the money. The main issue that we cover today is an assessed event in the Philippines, which I'll cover in a short while. We've, of course, also covering in depth and daily assessments on the situation in Myanmar, where the death toll now amongst security forces is just about 6,150 and just over 2,000 civilian deaths. Just to put that in perspective, COVID's had 19,349 casualties. We also assessed another 24 other developments in East Asia Pacific, and I won't try to cover any of those, just 2. One that we did assess was the People Power Revolution, or the anniversary of it at least, from 1986. We'll see demonstrations from many groups in Manila tomorrow. There's a real strong move back towards a fear of autocracy and obviously that's being aided by Duterte's been quite militant, and perhaps people feel human rights and democratic values have been lost in his manner in which there's been killings, extrajudicial type killings against alleged drug people, many of whom are involved in drug dealers, but some of whom are just pretty innocent users and some not related to it at all. But also the front runner for the next election is former dictator Marcos's son. So that's of great concern in the Philippines. That said, Duterte remains extremely popular, so let's not overrate that. Finally, I would also just say have a key look at Thailand. Thailand's making it easier again to get into Thailand. Thailand tourist lobbyists were concerned that it was a lot easier to get into the Philippines and other countries. So Thailand has dropped its 2 tests of PCR tests on day 1 and day 5 and the need for an expensive hotel to facilitate that process to just the first day. And they've replaced it with they've replaced that with another test, which is an automated test on day 5 instead of the need to have a hotel. Thailand's also, just a reminder, there's been 2 policemen were injured in a bomb attack in the southern province of Yala, and a defence volunteer was shot in Narathiwat. Now, both of these are southern provinces, but they do have very established tourism destinations as well. So most foreigners won't head to those, but it is just very important to note that the 4 southern provinces are dangerous. There's been some minor demonstrations, but it's not politically motivated demonstrations in Bangkok outside of Government House. They're quite minor groups and minor issues, but again, if you want more information, contact us for assessments if you're a member. Bhargav, finally, one thing we didn't carry off on Ukraine is when are we likely to pump out an updated assessment based on the rapid rate of change since we put out an assessment for our clients yesterday?
Paul, we are aiming for sometime the close of business today. Missing that, it'll be out early, the first thing in the morning.
Okay, I think we need to get it out today, okay?
Certainly, Paul, yes.
And we can do another one tomorrow as necessary. All right, great. Everybody, thank you very much. Bhargav.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, team. See ya.